Imagine putting your trust in a doctor who over the course of almost 15 years tells you that you have a disease and only repeated surgeries will cure it. And then imagine finding out that you don't have the disease and you never needed those procedures in the first place. My next guest says that's what happened to her. Marjorie Tortoriello was looking for a gynecologist in 1984 when a good friend recommended she see Dr. Niels Larson, known as the celebrity doctor. He had diagnosed her with endometriosis, a painful condition that requires tissue to be removed. After more than a dozen surgeries, she began to ask questions, and after finally getting a second opinion, the answer was devastating. Marjorie Tortoriello is suing. She's my guest today, along with her lawyer, Jeffrey Shapiro. Okay, when did you go to see Jeffrey Shapiro?
I saw Jeffrey last year.
Okay. Jeffrey, tell us what the opportunity is for a patient to get his or her own medical records. It sounds like I can't walk into my doctor's office and necessarily get copies?
You're perfectly well entitled to them as a matter of law. All you have to do is sign a release, and the doctor's required to give them to you. In this case, Dr. Larson, when asked by Margie for her records, said he would provide them, then he said he would try to find them, then he said he lost them, and finally he asked for her help in recreating her records.
Her help?
Yes. Okay. He wrote her a letter saying, well, we can't find your records. 13 years of records seem to have disappeared. Perhaps you could help me recreate your records.
Okay, that is very troubling. Also, you are examining another relationship that may be involved in this. Have you sued the lab that did all of the test work throughout these 13 procedures? Because I assume you've got a laboratory who is returning tests indicating no problem with this patient.
Well, let me tell you just what sort of blew the lid off of this whole thing is that 11 of these procedures were done in the doctor's office. The doctor would send his tissue specimens to a lab that he used in New Jersey, and presumably that lab would send back the results, which would come back and be put in his file. 2 years ago, the last procedure, her insurance would no longer pay for an in-office procedure. So Margie had the procedure done at Lenox Hill Hospital here in New York City. It was when that pathology department took a look at the tissues which Dr. Larson removed from her uterus and found that the tissue that he removed was perfectly healthy. That in fact, she didn't have endometriosis and she did not have an ovarian cyst.
Okay, well, what is the obligation of a laboratory to notify a patient? Is there any whatsoever, or is there anything that should have triggered them to behave differently than they did?
The problem is that the laboratory results, along with Dr. Larson's records, at this moment appear not to exist. Whether the lab kept reports, we don't know. The fact is that this lab worked hand in hand with Dr. Larson for something like 12 years. This is a case, by the way, which, without records, without anything from Lenox Hill Hospital, we would be able to make out the simple fact of a doctor performing 13 laparoscopic procedures, regardless of what Ms. Tortoriello's medical condition were, is absolutely unacceptable.
And they went in the final time. Doctor says, got to have your uterus out, didn't they?
Sure did.
Why?
Well, we found that because of all of these procedures, these repeated procedures, the insult to her uterus was to such an extent, and so much scar tissue was created in her uterus, that her uterus was adhering to her bladder and was causing her bladder problems. So therefore, she had to undergo a partial hysterectomy. I just want to say something to you that this case and what took place here goes to the heart of the doctor-patient relationship. People go to doctors, I believe, because they want to trust them. Yeah. They do trust them, and they want to trust them, because in what position are you as a layperson to second-guess a doctor? Here's a doctor who held himself out to be an expert in the field, published books, had a high-profile Park Avenue office, had a celebrity clientele, and his patients were a cross-section of people. These were not just high-profile people. People went to him because they felt that he was the best doctor, so therefore they wanted to trust him. And when that doctor tells a person that you need to have a yearly procedure in my office because that's how we should treat your condition, it's easy to second guess and say, well, why didn't you know that wasn't true? But Margie's not a doctor.
Well, Jeffrey, let me ask you, turning before we run out of time, to some proposed legislation being discussed on Capitol Hill. I understand the American Medical Association opposes the opening up of a doctor's history, if you will, any malpractice claims, any that have been paid out, problems, because I understand this particular doctor was being investigated for insurance fraud. Not that that necessarily would mean he was a bad doctor, other than defrauding the government government or an insurance company. But is this the kind of legislation that would help patients in analyzing, evaluating their doctors?
That's certainly important. I mean, there's no reason for a prospective patient not to know what the prior history of this doctor is, what cases have been brought against him, what inquiries have been made against him or her. That's certainly crucial information. Any patient ought to have the right to know before they go see a doctor.
All right, well, legally, though, you're going to pursue a lawsuit, and I want to finish up with Margie answering this question, but your opinion, what are patients supposed to do other than take their chances and then possibly after the fact get this second opinion?
Well, here's what I think. Here's my view of this, and by the way, this is based upon not only Margie but other women who have
Sure.
heard him, who I've heard from, who have been treated by this doctor. I believe that there is an abuse of in-office operative procedures. Doctors doing this in-house without review of a hospital. This is a procedure that's subject to abuse. A laparoscopy can be performed in a doctor's office. He set up a surgical suite to do so. I think that people should get second opinions whenever possible, but I also think women, in particular with laparoscopies, or any person with an in-office procedure should be very suspect of that, and keep in mind that the doctor controls everything. He controls the lab results, he controls the procedure. He had an anesthesiologist on staff in this office. That is a situation, a medical situation that is prone to abuse. And I don't think that Margie's the only woman in this country who has been abused by in-office laparoscopic procedures. I think this is a widespread problem.
And certainly we're going to keep an eye on that story up on Capitol Hill and find out if the AMA can put up a good defense and keep us from finding out about doctors. Jeffrey Shapiro, Marjorie Tortoriello, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.